One of the most anticipated moments in action games are boss battles, and while many of those fights push our skills, builds, technique and our knowledge, there are cases where things simply get out of hand and we start to see game over after game over after game over. Okay, that is the idea of this video. Quite similar to the one regarding DRPGs. Through these past years I've fought many bosses, so I wanna share some of the ones that have beaten me to pieces, or a couple of dumb encounters where I had to push myself because of XYZ reason. On this front, expect a second part in a couple of months cause there's enough material. Of course, if you would like to share the story of how you defeated a boss you found difficult, let us know in the comments below. Without further ado, let's begin. I want to open the curtain with something really moronic from my side. Tales of Arise in general isn't that hard, but I didn't know how to use items, so I was beating bosses like a champ, pretty much no cures and trying to avoid things as efficiently as possible. Shion was the MVP on this case. She was the one reviving me every time I perished, but there are limits to how many times that can be done. And you will guess, this dude beat like 1 or 2 enemies without knowing how to cure himself. Yes, that is what I would like to say, but nah. I didn't know how to cure myself up until I beat this Ooze Hive enemy. Now I was playing hard, but to be honest I didn't want to reduce the difficulty because the gameplay was enjoyable as heck. However, little mistakes were punishing. So I don't remember how many times I had to retry this boss, but at least 3 or 4 times. And yep, in the end, I wasn't even able to stay alive. So here the gals were the ones carrying me in these kinds of battles. Aside from this, once I got how to use items, well, bosses were challenging, but not to a point where it is needed to learn most moves. In the 9th place we find the Mother Worm from Star Ocean, the Divine Force. For some reason Star Ocean games seem to have this fame of something janky and unbalanced, with tedious difficulty spikes and so on. Now I am not the one saying that. Back when I shared my thoughts about this game, that is what most of you told me about the series. And yeah, in general this game is filled with these kinds of fights, where bosses feel quite unbalanced and kinda cheap. And while later I found a way to cheese the bosses, in this specific battle there aren't many options. And I had tried it multiple times, but man, your NPC partners are simply bad in this game. In the end I stopped reviving them because I was wasting a lot of items and they were falling like flies. So Ethelberd is the one to go, as he was able to heal some HP, so if you're confident with your skills to avoid and stuff like that, that is most likely the way to go. And the deal with this game is that there is another layer to make things rather difficult, because you have AP, which is obtained through specific actions. And this being my first time playing this game, well, there were multiple doubts regarding the system, which for better or worse limits your actions, so you cannot spam attacks like there's no tomorrow, and you cannot run all the time either, otherwise this AP do not come back. So yep, there are multiple little limitations here and there. So it was all about brute forcing my way through the boss and do cheap damage for a little over 6 minutes. Then again, later you will find other cheap bosses, but there is a simple way to cheese the whole game. So to me, this was the most challenging fight because of limited options. From here on out we leave the easier confrontations and get into good challenges where I suffer for a while. The 8th place is opened by Hail, from Luminous Avenger It's 2. After Capcom left the CX games to rot, Indie Creates used all the knowledge acquired for the Gumball series, and subsequently this side of the story. And while the game is reasonable for the most part, you need to finish this whole mess in hard difficulty to unlock the real ending. Now, there are way too many challenges, and most bosses feel like things are simply cheap, unfair, and way too annoying for their own good. However, once again, I will say that this falls under the limited options category. There are many weapons by this point and you need to learn every stage and boss fight, otherwise you will have to repeat each battle like we did back in the day. With this said, the main stage isn't that big of a deal. For the most part, it is all about surviving long enough to reach the boss and then headbang a wall like a masochist. Now, bosses are especially tough in this game because they have 3 HP bars, and as you reach the last one, they pull some of the nastiest moves which can literally destroy you because most of your HP is drained by a couple of hits, so every mistake is punishing. With that said, you will suffer through the whole game. But there was something I didn't like about Hell, which is the stupid skill to freeze. It is obnoxious to say the least. It threw me off guard every single time I had to deal with it. Next, we find the Crapicious from Oninaki. Now, Oninaki is one of those games that has a weird learning curve, plus little spikes here and there. Reason why multiple bosses may be annoying in their own way, but for some reason this dude was just too much. It has a move that depletes your whole HP as if nothing, simple like that. Combine this with the fact that he is able to paralyze your character, which means not able to dash or move fast, and that is a marvelous combo to deal with noobs like me. Now, in this game there are different ways in which you can advance, and more or less improve the experience, but there is no written rule of which diamonds you should use. And to be fair, I have no idea if the ones I chose weren't that good or decent for this encounter. The deal is that each diamond has different weaknesses and strong attributes, and by this point if memory works well you have like 4 or 5 options, but 2 of those options felt way too slow. And this game has a little janky feeling. At least do not compare this game with something like a Titan Quest, Last Epoch, Diablo, Grim Dawn, etc, etc. It is less responsive, so you need to time moves with a delay in mind, turning the experience into a whole crusade in some moments. Then we have Remilia from Scarlet Symphony. Scarlet Symphony is a love letter to the very first Castlevania games, plus having a menacing aesthetic. Now there aren't many things to keep in mind in this game. You can attack, fly kinda slow, and use some skills depending if you choose Cyrno, Marisa, or Suika. That is literally all you need to know, and it is quite similar to Luminous Avenger Eats 2. The main stage isn't that big of a deal. Bosses are the ones that can beat the heck out of you quite easy, which is exactly what happened to me. Now in this case I am showing the hard difficulty, cause normal isn't that big of a deal, and yeah, if you wonder, there is a harder boss lurking in the basement, but I'll let you find that one on your own. Okay, the deal with this fight is that Remilia can beat you with 2 hits, and luckily she has 2 moves that are quite fast, giving you a small hint and then boom, right in the face. So it is all about more or less guessing the angle in which some rays are going to be projected, and try to position on the go. If it looks like it isn't that big of a deal, it is because I died a lot, having to repeat the fight way too many times, until pretty much learning most moves. In the 5th spot, I wanna place Ethelberd from Rune Factory 4. Now in this run I was playing in Hell difficulty, because why not? Needless to mention that the whole experience is rather punishing. Most enemies can beat you in dumb ways because they deal absurd amounts of damage. Now guess what is going to do the last boss of the second arc? The MVPs of this fight are the pets, cause I am dealing cheap damage. And of course I don't recommend people to get into that difficulty right away, cause there are multiple mechanics that you need to learn, plus the ways in which you need to raise your pets. Otherwise, some previous encounters may feel like a kick in the nuts. But okay, the deal with this boss is that he can literally beat you in less than a second if you commit a dumb mistake, or if you get caught between those light orbs he spams late in the fight. Ah, Jesus Chrysler. And that is pretty much about it. If it looks like I am playing way too conservative, it is because up close and personal is just a bad idea, or at least considering what I had at hand in that specific moment. Next, we can find Ulb, the Mad Knight, from Ender Lilies. I am sure most of you know this marvelous Metroidvania with a dash of Souls-like, meaning that bosses will hand your sorry arse relatively easy, and your curing action is a bit slow, to say the least. It is worth mentioning that this was my second round, but I was playing in something like a hard mode. Enemies have twice the HP and damage, which is the reason why it looks kinda nasty the amount of damage he is able to deal. And while I do not have the whole fight, I still remember how this last minute felt like an eternity, as there were no more cures or chances to get hit. And this being a Metroidvania, well, later there are multiple options at hand, but by this point there aren't many things you can do. So it is all about going up close and personal, while changing skills as efficiently as possible to maximize DPS. Aside from that, these kinds of encounters fall into the memorizing most moves as well as possible. In the third place we can find Loss, the Broken Wings, from Afterimage, which is another Metroidvania with Souls influences. Personally, I think this is one of the best Metroidvanias, just because once you get some basic skills, the world is yours to explore. You can even cheese some parts to reach areas that in theory you shouldn't know early in the game. But okay, Loss is a decent challenge. However, this was a nightmare for me because I was exploring areas that most likely were several levels above. Kinda easy to notice considering that he has that little symbol on top, meaning that this encounter was a bad idea since the get-go. But I don't like to leave the ring just because something is challenging. Now, the first half of the fight isn't that big of a deal. This turns into a nightmare once you reach the mid of the fight, because this dude starts to limit your space with a move that blocks a decent chunk of the stage. Worst case scenario, it turns into multiple hits if it corners you. And now that I am looking at the footage once again, it doesn't look that hard. But the differences in levels can turn some fights into absurd challenges. With this said, yes, there are dumber ways to perish against these kinds of bosses. In the second place, I want to throw the Loran Darkbeast from Bloodborne. Now in this game there are multiple cool challenges, but unfortunately I have no footage when I finish it in match level 4, but for those who know the game, these damn chalices are just a nightmare. If it were up to personal opinion, the doggo that is on fire is simply obnoxious, and a terrible fight if you dive into the hardest chalices. While diving for the first time, Amygdala isn't that different either. Actually, most boss battles in these cursed ones are just kinda terrible encounters. Well, the deal is that the Dark Beast beat the heck out of me so many times that I simply lost count. And the worst thing is that in this footage, it looks so easy to beat. What can I say? Once you get what you're doing, yes, it isn't that hard to fight. But prior to that, it is just a nightmare, especially in these places. And to close the bid, and number 1 in this first round of hard boss encounters, Lunagaron from Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. I am sure some of you are looking at this with weird eyes, like, really dude? And yep, try beating this thing without armor. Literally use a charm, a weapon, and beat the crap out of it. Now, this wasn't my first armorless run, but in my experience the SNS is slightly easier, considering that you have free movement to attack and retreat. But the lance is just a bad idea, because either you insta-block it to live another second, or get pushed, meaning that you will lose a lot of HP and potentially get hit a second time, reducing your stamina and be completely open with pretty much no time to react. So that is why this thing is in the first place. By this point in the game there weren't many options, so it was all about learning every single opening and poke like there's no tomorrow. The worst thing about these encounters is that they can take a lot of time, and with time you start to commit little mistakes, and with every single mistake things will feel like, that's it, another run into the trash. Until miraculously you are able to do it. But something I love so much about this fight is that it is quite dynamic, fast-paced and enjoyable in general. In any case, for those curious about these runs, I'll place the links below so you can check them out. With this, I hope you found this video entertaining. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.